So there's that. What else? What are some other things that they like to talk about? They like to say that you what's one the crazy thing is that they're like, okay, yeah, the sun and moon are pretty close to the Earth, and they just revolve around. It's like, okay, well, they revolve. What's holding them up there? You can ask the flat earthers, well, what's holding them up? What's making them make this constant turn around the Earth? I mean, to have a constant turn, you have to have something constantly exerting a force on it. So, maybe they would say, oh, it's the magic magnetic mountain at the North Pole or something. All right, well, not only in their model does the sun and moon have to keep going around in circles, but the circles have to get bigger and smaller as the seasons progress. So they're like, oh yeah, the orbit in the summer is small, and then in the fall the orbit's big. Not only does the orbit change in size, but it also gets higher up. And it's like, okay, well, what is the force that's pushing the sun and moon in these crazy configurations all the time? It's like there has to be a pretty, there's probably a reason why the ancients believed in like a chariot of Apollo that dragged this on across the sky, because there's no other way to explain how the sun is making these crazy movements except the globe Earth theory, which is that the sun isn't really moving much at all, but we're just orbiting around it, and our tilt, Earth's tilt, can explain the differences in daylight times and everything. So globe Earth theory is much more simple, much more elegant, and it explains everything, whereas the flat Earth theory does not. And this is the proof that actually made me leave the flat Earth movement, and that proof is that when you look at a globe, when you look at the daylight times at the winter solstice, so suppose the sun is over here, suppose the Earth is here, and this is its axis. So this is the winter solstice, when the south part of the Earth, so Antarctica, is facing the sun the most. So at this time, the winter solstice, when the axis looks like that, we see 24-hour daylight at the South Pole. Now, according to Flat Earth model, this is impossible for there to be 24-hour daylight at the South Pole, because the sun can't stop. The sun isn't stopping over the South Pole in Flat Earth model. So then people are like, oh, well, you've never been to Antarctica. How do you know that there's 24-hour daylight? Well, I'm like, all right, fine. I won't even say that Antarctica has 24-hour daylight. Let's just look at other countries in the southern hemisphere. Do they line up? So I look at the bottom of South America, which is the closest point to Antarctica or whatever, and it has 17-hour daylight in the winter solstice, which is also impossible according to Flat Earth. So that lined up. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's look at the next closest point, which is South Africa or New Zealand or something. I think it's South Africa's next. I look there, and it's 14.5-hour daylight. I'm like, okay, well, that lines up. I mean, it's all making sense. And I look at New Zealand, and it's like 13.5 or 14. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So so the data collaborates. The data all lines up that yes, the South Pole is going to have 24-hour days. Even if we took Antarctica out of the equation, the 17-hour daylight in Tierra del Fuego at the winter solstice disproves Flat Earth, because you just can't have 17 hours of daylight there. So that's another thing. Trying to think of what else there is. We talked about NASA, we talked about the horizon line, we talked about how far you can see, we talked about daylight times. That's pretty much it. And there's also the how long it takes to how long it takes to boat around Antarctica. You know, and people have gone around Antarctica, but they have taken a long time to do it, and they haven't made like a direct path. And you know, you look at these people's logs, and the reason is just because the weather was just so bad. I mean, they had to go up north more because the weather and stuff. So, you know, probably the things that I guess concern me the most about globe theory would be probably, you know, why hasn't anybody been able to just go around Antarctica that quickly? But I think in order to go around Antarctica and to see the coast the whole way, I mean, you're just going to be hitting like horrible, horrible seas, and it's almost undoable, you know, just like hiking through Antarctica. It's like practically impossible, you know, so it's just a very difficult part of the Earth. So anyway, flat Earth theory. Oh, and another one is satellites. You know, and according to flat Earth, satellites do not exist. And they're like, okay, well, you can just, all of the satellite stuff that you see, or that you have, like GPS, like Google Earth or whatever, or what are the other satellite phones or whatever, it's all ground-based. And, you know, while that may be true to some extent, maybe there is more ground-based stuff that's called satellite than there really is, and maybe satellites really are not taking pictures. Maybe Google Earth is just from these high-altitude airplanes taking pictures. Because, you know, as you zoom out in Google Earth, it just kind of loses all of its precision and stuff. So it's like, well, maybe it is fake. You know, maybe these are just high altitude planes taking pictures. But that does not prove flat Earth or anything like that, or even lend credence to it. I mean, that's just a technological thing. Maybe we're lied to, just like NASA lies to us. You know, who knows? But I have seen satellites. I used to be, I guess you call me an amateur astronomer. I used to be really into telescopes. I had a 16-inch, which is basically an observatory-grade telescope that I would look around with, basically as a kid, I guess. You know, I was probably, 15 years old. But, you know, I had high-tech equipment and stuff. And, you know, I would spend some nights out there just looking around. You know, it's a peaceful thing to do. You know, you're just looking in your scope into deep space. You know, I have this 16-inch telescope, so I'm multiplying the size of my pupil by like thousands of times, so you can see. You can magnify a lot, and you can collect a lot of light. So I just looked around. You know, I spent times at night outside. You know, very peaceful, just looking at the night sky. And I saw satellites. I mean, the first time I saw one, I was like, what the heck is that? It's just like a little white dot that just is moving across, you know, your eyepiece in the telescope. I see this little white dot moving past. Like, it's not a shooting star, because a shooting star would zoom past and, you know, spits out. I had no idea what it was. I was like, Dad, I asked my dad, what the heck is that? What little white dot that just moves, like, constantly? You know, and I followed it. You know, I would keep following it and following it and following it. And eventually it would it would disappear. Just totally disappear. So I talked to my dad, and I talked to other astronomers. I was like, what the heck are these things that I'm seeing, these little white dots? They're like, oh, those are satellites. I'm like, why does it disappear? I'm like, oh, it's because it goes into the Earth's shadow once in a while. I was like, you know, that totally makes sense. Totally. And I probably saw 100 of those in my times just casually observing the night sky. And I would follow them. And, you know, sometimes I could follow them halfway across the sky. Sometimes I could follow them a quarter of the way across the sky. It just depends on, you know, where the telescope was, where the Earth's shadow was. And yeah, and I calculated their speed and stuff, I think, because the eyepiece is a certain, you can see a certain amount of degrees in the eyepiece across the sky. So I was like, okay, it takes this many seconds to cross the eyepiece. I know what the eyepiece um, degree thing is. So then I calculated the speed, and it lined up, with satellite speed and stuff. So I know satellites exist. So for them to say that satellites do not exist and blah, 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 nobody can see satellites with the naked eye. Well, yeah, I mean, if you have a telescope, you can see it. And people are like, oh, it's the size of... Satellites are so small that you would never be able to see it. Well, you know what? There's a reason why people use signal mirrors to signal for rescues, because even if they can't see you, they can see the light you're reflecting. It's the same with the satellite. Yeah, when the satellite went in the Earth's shadow, I couldn't see it. But when it was reflecting light out there, you can see it. It looks like just a white dot because the sunlight is bouncing off of it. So you can see satellites. I mean, flat earthers will tell you that you cannot, but go get a telescope, go stare in a random location in the night sky for a few nights, and you will see them. Alright, that's pretty much it. I think I thoroughly disproved flat earth theory. Leave any comments, asking questions, and I will see you on the flip side. Thank you. Also, just a couple more quick things. They say that, the stars all look exactly the same, from winter solstice to summer solstice. We should be, since we're in different places in the solar system, we should see the stars in different places in the winter solstice and the summer solstice. And that's true, we should see difference, but the thing the flat earthers deny, that I don't know if they don't realize it or what, but actually things do change. It's called seasonal parallax, or something like that. Parallax, star parallax. And what happens is, yeah, there is a measurable shift in the stars between the summer and winter. I mean, just Google that. Stellar parallax, I think it's called. There is a measurable change. Yeah, maybe the flat earthers can't measure it because they don't have, sophisticated equipment, but if you do, you can measure it. I mean, it's a very small amount, and they have been able to measure it since like the 1850s. So to say that, that we're not revolving around the sun is totally false. Also, I just wanted to tie this into the reason for this Flat Earth COINTELPRO. And that is to basically get everybody who thinks NASA is a scam to be flat earthers. I mean, that's the best way to discredit anyone. I mean, because, number one, NASA is a scam. Apollo never made it to the moon. Okay? We have never been to the moon. Humans have never been there. And rockets don't work in space, so the only way to get things in space is to literally throw them up. But what goes up will come down, and these satellites will stay up for a while, but they will eventually crash back down. You can't, all you can do is throw something out and it's going to end up orbiting the Earth. I mean, you cannot get past that fact. I mean, maybe light drive that they're pushing for will be able to let us travel through space, but not going to be a very efficient or good way of travel. So for all intents and purposes, we cannot travel into space. So NASA is a total scam, but they're using this flat Earth to get all of the people who think NASA or believe or know NASA is a scam to be flat earthers. That way they are super easy to discredit. So that is what they're doing. They're using this opposition group to cover over their ass, to cover over NASA's ass, so basically they discredit anybody who disbelieves their fancy pictures and videos. Anyway, that is all. Thanks for tuning in, and do work.